Someone opens a cafe in England, there's 3 owners. I'm like, disaster. There's no way that one cafe is making the 3 of you enough money. So what's going to happen is when you all realize that after year 3 or 4, either one of you is going to buy the other 2 out, you're all going to shut it down and go open your own thing, or you'll just do something else entirely.
3-time UK barista champion.
My name is Maxwell Colonna-Dashwood. I have my own businesses in coffee. I run cafes. I publish books. I work with biotech inventors and scientists.
Throwing I work with biotech is always a good one. I need to have that on my resume.
Without knowing it, there's quite a lot of greenwashing happening in coffee. We all see each other do something and everyone's like, wow, we're all well-meaning and we're all doing it, so it's all right? And I think that some of the greenwashing in the industry has come from that sort of attitude.
What are some of those things specifically that you think are kind of happening? Hello, I'm your host, Rowan Cook. I make coffee on the internet.
And my name is Ben Bicknell. I judge people who make coffee, but only at competitions.
And together we are
It's Just Coffee,
the podcast for people who know it's never just coffee, and the podcast for people who have just done this for the second time because a producer didn't press record. Yeah, there we go. A bit of funky music to get us going. But we're here again, Ben. Take us off.
I want to talk about how hard it is to learn about coffee these days.
Yeah.
And now, I don't know if it was your experience, Rowan, but for me, I think we almost had it easy a couple of decades ago when I was getting into coffee, that you start learning about it and there really wasn't much information out there, right? You kind of like Googling on some crazy online forums, shout out to Coffee back in the day, trying to learn from people on the other side of the country, on the other side of the world. But there weren't many courses, there wasn't much published information. And so the learning process was quite simple. It's like you got an idea, you tested it, you tasted it and go, oh, yeah, that's kind of a little bit better. Okay, we'll do that. We've got a little bit more knowledge. And you're teasing it out. And now there's an avalanche of info, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started, we just had like the grinder with like the little clicker on the side. We were just filling up the basket and cutting it off. But now there are people who like watch my channel, and I'm sure even more intense people like Lance, and they're going into a cafe with like all this knowledge about, oh, what size burrs are you using? Is it flat? Is it conical? Is it this? Is it that? And they're like, oh, how long have you worked in coffee? They're like, oh, I've never touched a machine in my life. I've just watched TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's actually another interesting part is that we have this plethora and kind of a wealth of information and content out there, but then there's a real difference to implementing that in the real world and getting hands-on and tactile and seeing what works beyond a social media reel, in real life. So really wanted to tackle some of that. How can we learn a little bit better and how can we put that into practice? And so I'm very excited to welcome along our next guest to the podcast here, a 3-time UK barista champion, took it to the worlds multiple times there, a published author of a couple of different coffee-related books.
Water for Coffee, one of them.
Water for Coffee. We're starting to get some hints of who it might be. And has also got a roastery and a couple of cafes starting in Bath in England. And some cafes.
Yeah, some cafes. And let's say curious coffee guy. That's just a student of coffee, I would say.
Definitely. It is none other than Maxwell Colonna-Dashwood. Welcome to the pod. Woo!
Don't go anywhere. We're going to have a quick word from one of our sponsors, Apax Lab. Elevate your coffee experience with Apax Lab mineral concentrates. Apax Lab's precision-engineered formulas, including tonic, jam, and lilac, are designed to enhance the coffee's natural flavors. Not going to change it, it's just going to enhance it. It's going to bring out the vibrant acidity, the rich sweetness, or if you use lilac, it might bring out those delicate floral notes that you've been looking for. Trusted by world-class cafes and even barista champions, Apax Lab helps you unlock your coffee's full potential. Discover more at apaxlab.com. Wait, where was that again, Sonam?
The internet.
Oh, okay. Thought I was going to say the website. Thanks. Today's episode is brought to you by our amazing sponsors at Eco Barista. The reason I sound like this is because they got massages at our stand at Mice, and so I'm getting a massage while recording this message for you. They're the best sponsor of the pod that we could have had. They have the best eco products. This probably sounds really pornographic, but it's not. I'm just getting a massage.
They have the best eco-friendly coffee products. They got coffee bags that you can design yourself. They got cups, they got iced coffee cups. They got everything you need. So make sure to support them because they support us. Head to ecobarista.com.au and get 15% off your first purchase when you sign up. Oh, mama, that's good.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here. And great to hear about. I wanted to know when is a couple of decades ago for you, other than a couple of decades, but like, when was it you got into coffee? And where exactly did you have the opportunity to play around in the way you just described? Because I think I would say I agree with you that potentially it's more overwhelming to learn about coffee now, but the access to information, there's more opportunity to access, right? Whereas when I started, there weren't that many places doing interesting things. So the problem was trying to get a job in one of those interesting places because there just wasn't many places to learn.
Yeah, I love how he's just like turned the interviewer to the interviewee straight away there for us. He's like, well, let me ask you a question.
Oh, no.
Look, my coffee journey started actually back in 2000, so 25 years this year. And as we've kind of talked about on the pod before, I actually started in a franchise group in Glory Jeans, a Glory Jeans cafe.
Yeah, that's where you can experiment with a little bit of caramel, a little bit of whipped cream.
Well, I think it's interesting, right? Because we kind of talk in specialty coffee. Often there's this pressure that your learning journey has to start like right up here. You know, it's not intro level. It's really stepped. And I think, you know, with my learning journey, it was that. It's like I start with like, I don't know what it was. I think I said a mocha orange kind of coffee. And then you start learning.
Frappuccino.
Yeah, probably. And then you start learning what happens if I put a different ratio of coffee in with these flavoring syrups. Like if I have more coffee or, you know, how do I do this? And so it's actually a really incremental learning process of just tasting the basics. You know?
I would say it's probably like at that stage, it's too slow, that learning kind of process. Because I found that like every time I went to a better cafe, I learnt at like 6 times the rate each time. And it was just the people above me teaching. The thing that I liked about that was the efficiency of learning how to work fast and then going to work from someone really smart and learning a lot from them.
I think you're talking about learning different things, right? Yeah. So for me, I like to taste all sorts of coffee, not just, you know, if you ask me what my favorite coffee is, my answer these days is expensive coffee. It just seems to be what I like to drink, right? High scoring, aromatic, clean coffee more than ever. But I like to taste a wide range of coffee from across the industry. And I encourage my teams, whether it's in the roastery or the shops, to do the same thing and be interested in the whole industry, right? And I often think that people I hire, the ones that have worked in more commercial environments, you know, often do have a very good footing, like a basic fun professional approach to their job and doing a job well. And I think when I got into coffee in Melbourne in 2006, I worked in the CBD in super busy cafes that were not using boutique or specialty coffee. I've tried to move away from the term specialty towards boutique because I don't like specialty, but we can talk about that later.
Well, I'm going to write that down. We need to get back into that.
Write that one down. But I think it was called Zuma Cafe. It was on the corner of Little Collins and Queen Street. And it was like a busy Monday to Friday. There were no dockets. You had to memorize every order, but it was like 60 kilos of coffee in 5 days. And I remember like on day one, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Like the guy who owned it was selling it to a new owner and he was trying to make it out like it's easy. And I'm like, this isn't easy, mate. You built your whole business on you. You're incredible. Your customer service is amazing. You memorize all your customers' orders. But it took me a couple months, but I got there and I loved that challenge. And that was nothing really to do with coffee, right? That was about hospitality and, you know, memorizing and all the different customers' orders and drinks. And I kind of see a lot of the skills in a hospitality environment separate from your passion or interest in coffee. I was saying the same thing today. I had a producer from India visit me at the roastery. It's the same thing. I'm like, okay, what is it? Whatever your job is in the roastery, for example, what are the core professional skills that you need to do really well? And would you do those if it wasn't even coffee, right? So would you do it if you were making denim jeans? I don't know, anything else. And ideally, I think if you're going to have a career in coffee, you need to really love the work, not the coffee, the work. And then the bonus is you can find a role or a work you love and tie it in with your passion for coffee. But I think when we talk about learning, and I think when people ask about careers, I think there is often too much focus on learning about the topic of coffee. and not enough about developing professional capabilities and skills. And so sort of, for me, different environments are going to give you different things, which is why I don't want to hire me now because I basically was like, I think I can get a lot out of this company in 4 months or 3 months, right? Whereas for the company, they're thinking it's going to take you a couple months to get up to speed. Then you're going to be good. And then we get more from you. You contribute more to the business. So I sort of hopped around different businesses trying to find environments that I felt would allow me to learn. And to your point before, there's more information than ever. Like, it's crazy. I think about how hard it was to try and find out about certain things when I started. There was like 1 or 2 coffee books and, the odd blog. It was so challenging. So that's, I think, got easier. But actually, what it did do was it allowed you, because the only way to learn was to get a job in a coffee business. You learnt, practically in an analog way. And I think I was saying to you before, Chris, who I wrote Water for Coffee with, who's a chemist, you think about academia and it's very conceptual and, it's a lot of cognitive power. And it was interesting to me because he said, we've got this Korean scientist staying with us for 6 months. And a lot of the professors, even the professors with tenure at universities, they will, I can't remember the time frame, you'd have to ask Chris, but they will go and work in a completely different field of science than their own specialism for 6 months in a completely different location. And I was like, really? Does that still happen? Because you've got the, YouTube now and online learning. He's like, no, absolutely. You're only going to learn by physically putting yourself in that environment and doing it. And I think coffee is a great example of that. Like, this whole debate about great coffee at home versus cafes and which one's better. I think ultimately the home doesn't have the commercial pressures of the cafe, but I still think you learn something from commercial pressures. So it shouldn't be seen as like the two are mutually exclusive. But the home allows you to slow down and focus on process. You don't have that efficiency or the margin or the speed, but you just don't have the exposure. You're only going to make 2 or 3 cups of coffee in a day. And it's not just about making a lot of coffee in a day and exposing yourself, but it's about being around other people and bouncing your understanding and ideas off other people. And people always say you should never sort of learn to taste on your own, and you'll learn so much quicker tasting with other people. Obviously, you need the confidence to put yourself out there. And I would say when I got into coffee, there were a few people who have put themselves in positions as arbiters of taste, and they would say stuff with such surety that the rest of the people in the room are like, oh, maybe I didn't get orange blossom, but maybe I just don't know what I'm doing. So, but I think we've come a long way since then, but I think we still need to do it. It's an apprenticeship-driven subject industry. We need to be exposed to coffee, I think, to learn. Because we could talk today about science and all these different ideas, but at the end of the day, we're all talking about the drink, really. And, that's a taste subject, and all taste subjects are the same. I've got a friend, Travis, he worked for me, brilliant, incredible memory, could just memorize everything. And he got into wine. And so he could tell you straight away about the different appellations and the different regions, but he still needed to drink a lot of wine, to be able to draw, which he's also very good at. But yeah, so I think it's interesting figuring out how to learn in coffee, but it makes it harder that to learn well, you need to be in an environment where you can learn. And that's easier said than done. So I think a lot of trying to figure out how to learn is going, what do I need to expose myself to? Who do I need to be around? Where do I need to be? And that's never actually as easy as you think. To your point, like going and being in the shops or the roasteries or the business with the best reputations, they definitely have benefits for sure. But they're not the only places you can learn.
And so taking a step back, you've done quite a few different pathways of learning. Obviously you had the beginning time of your journey into coffee, as you were kind of saying, and hospitality, as you kind of mentioned around your time in Melbourne, and then kind of further when you returned home. But also you've competed a lot in the Barista Championships, which is a whole nother mindset around learning a particular framework and a particular way of preparing coffee. Yeah. And
I'll be honest, I'll just touch on competition because I was actually talking to this Indian producer about that today as well, which is back then I really felt like it was the only place I could go to really explore a lot of ideas. Like there wasn't what there is today. There wasn't the online community. And barista competitions for a lot of curious coffee people were just a very natural place for you to find yourself, right? Whereas I think today you could learn in a lot of ways that don't require coffee competition, and coffee competition is in and of itself a discipline within the world of coffee. But I really feel like back then it was like a center of a lot of the learning and curiosity.
That's kind of what Dale Harris was saying when he was on as well, wasn't it? He's like, I just did it because I needed to find people that I could connect with and talk with. And he's like, I made some of the best friends I've ever made just by doing these competitions.
Do you have any particular approaches or techniques or even just kind of mindsets when you're approaching learning new things, Maxwell?
Yeah, I think I don't try to be an evasive answerer of questions. But for me, I'm such a big stickler for context, especially in a subject like coffee. So I think it depends on, when I wrote the business book, it's very long because, other people, like I really like Colin's book, right? What I know about running coffee shops. And he's working on a second book now. I don't know the exact title, but it's in the same ilk, but bigger than the coffee shop. And we're actually sharing the same designer, a Northern Irish designer. He's just the guy to design coffee books. But Colin, I've always thought when we did Barista Comps as well, is very good at like summing things up into small sound bites. That's not me. I'm much more like long rambling. I used to blog and they were like several thousand words. And my friends, with short attention spans, moaned at me every time I released one and asked me for the summary or the abstract. But I think there's pros and cons. And I think coffee, a lot of it, context is important. And I think in the industry now more than ever. So if you said to me like about what was I learning, it depends on if it was about just learning a craft and a process, then I need to physically do it. Right. There'll be some cognitive bit. But when I was in New Zealand before I ended up in Melbourne with a working visa, I worked on vineyards in Melbourne in New Zealand, the north of the South Island in Marlborough for 6 months. And I remember starting on day one, like you get picked up at 5 a.m., driven to this vineyard, and it was all commission. So like it was in the middle of winter. You had to cut and strip a vine and wrap it. The first vineyard I worked on was Oyster Bay. And it was really, really hard work. I mean, really hard. And luckily I'm competitive. So there was this Chinese guy and this Hungarian guy, and they were so fast. And I remember being on like day one watching them and being like, how are they doing it? Right. And then just every day I just did it again. I exposed myself more and more. Was I cognitively learning any tricks? No. I was just doing it more and I just got better at it. And by like 4 weeks in, I could keep up with them. And, and it's a huge learning curve. I say to people when they start with, for me, like you're never going to be amazing at it on day one, the job. And so sometimes it's just about exposing yourself and allowing to learn that muscle memory and stuff. If we were to then say, how do I learn about, theoretical things or conceptual things, my general approach to that is what people call expert foiling. So what I do is I go and find the people I think or other people think are experts. Generally, when you've been involved in really studying any subject or you're seen as a quote unquote expert, you realize quote unquote experts often disagree with each other. Right. And this is why I struggle with like very rigid curriculums, because I'm like, well, that's just one framework to understand that subject. So to me, I didn't go to university, by the way. It was very odd to me. I was like, why would I do that? I can go and learn about all these things in a different way. There are pros of going to university. I'm not, the anti-university crowd. But for me personally, I was like, look, I can go and find different experts, different fields of theory. And in coffee, there's lots of those over the years. Some of them have come and gone and some of them are still here. And so what I do is I go and read the materials available. I always try and find viewpoints that disagree with each other as well. And so then I build what I would say is a meta-analysis. So if you're not familiar with the scientific realm, if you were to do like an academic paper, which was an experimental study, where we literally got in a lab and we said, hey, we are going to brew shots like this and measure the volatile aromatics. That is a small physical experiment. And because it's physical, it's limited. It's like looking at a map through a straw, right? And so often these very specific studies lack context and people have questions about them. They go, well, what grinder did you use? And how many coffees did you account for? And what water did you use? These are all valid questions. And so then when you step back and do a meta-analysis, which say, oh, look, there's 8 different papers all on this same subject. Are there any common findings across all 8? And that would be a meta-analysis, right? So I build up my own meta-analysis in my head. And then I go and find one of the experts and I tell them what they should know. which
they love that.
They love it, right? But you know why it works? Because if I'm wrong, they will want to tell me.
Yeah.
And so if they're quiet, I'm like, I think I've got a pretty good understanding of this subject at this moment in time. Right. And yeah, I don't know. I think maybe it's one of my strengths. Like I'm a curious person. I'm a natural autodidact. So I'm, will always check myself and be like, maybe my current understanding is wrong. Like I'll think that all the time. And maybe that comes naturally to me. And, I whether I've moved into trying to understand the C market or coffee pricing, which, even 7 years ago, the whole coffee industry pricing was pretty static. Specialty was at a premium and there wasn't much to learn really. And then suddenly the whole market's volatile and it's like, oof, we all need to know more about this because it's all affecting us more. And so I was forced to go and study it because in a subject like coffee, it's so vast. There's so much to learn. You can't learn it all at once. And there is also a time element here. And I say this about business in coffee as well, which is nothing about this industry is a short-term game. It's like, do you want to start your own business? Do you want a career in coffee? Like we're talking 20, 30 years. And I like that about it. I was at a trade show in London the other day and there was 3 of us stood around. We all started at the same time. And I was like, well, we're all still here. So, there must be opportunities to have careers in this industry or grow businesses. But I think it takes time. And yeah, so I think you need to be interested in what other people say, but you need to have a healthy cynicism. Because also one of the challenges in coffee, I believe, especially around the supply chain narrative, a lot of people's understanding around the supply chain in coffee is not from an academic studying of the supply chain. It's from marketing, because the coffee industry is full of so many coffee companies telling you why they are doing good. And to do that, they have to tell you what they think is wrong with the industry and why they're solving the problem. And, a lot of this information just gets disseminated through osmosis. And then people start to tell you how the coffee industry works as if it's like, an academic learning. You're like, well, no, that's not actually how it works, right? So I think there has to be a healthy amount of cynicism. And then there has to be a realistic appreciation of what we are not able to understand, which is a lot in coffee. Right. I think this is one of my, you might have seen my video years ago when I had a crack at YouTube and was like, blimey, this is exhausting. I won't be doing this again. But
Yeah.
I did this. Yeah. Well, different people find different things exhausting, but I did this rant about barista competitions and, I say it now, I think that I gained a lot from them. Lots of opportunity came from them. But I also felt like there wasn't enough of a critical voice about the bits that either don't work or could be improved. And so I was like, look, I'm happy to be that critical voice or one of them. And yeah, I immediately got quite a lot of backlash and people felt directly offended because there are lots of people volunteer like yourself, Ben. I know you put a lot of your time and energy and expertise, and that's great, right? But I wasn't attacking the individuals. I was saying, look, I think the structure has these problems. To my point just then, I think you are encouraged as a barista on stage to draw direct reasons behind everything you're doing, to say, this tastes this way because this comes from this farm and they do this because. And a lot of the time, I think leaps are made. And I'm like listening to it. And I'm like, I don't think you can say that. I don't think you can prove that. Right. Yeah. And it's the same with the coffee industry. A lot of the boutique indies are also, I think everyone's well-meaning. So we all see each other do something and everyone's like, wow, we're all well-meaning and we're all doing it. So it's all right, right? And I think that's some of the greenwashing in the industry has come from that sort of attitude, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's very genuine. But yeah.
So I think some of those things that you think we're doing that are greenwashing it.
Sorry?
What are some of those things specifically that you think are kind of happening?
Well, I mean, the direct trade one's a great one, right? Because, a lot of people have been in coffee for a long time would be very cynical of direct trade and be, oh, well, there's no such thing, etc. But it's still like a super common narrative. And often that's only said behind closed doors. And you'll see someone say direct trade doesn't make any sense. And then they have to sell some coffee. And then they're like, oh, yeah, all our coffee's direct trade. And so we started doing this project with a large corporate caterer in the UK. And they said to me, look, Max, we know you've presented coffees that are not traditionally certified, so not fair trade or RFA. Would you like to tell us your definition of direct trade? And I was like, well, no. And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't want to use the term. And they were like, what do you mean? I said, there's so much wrong here. So I started to explain that, how do you define it? All of that kind of stuff. But that's not really what's interesting to me. What's interesting to me is the base belief that direct must be best. So you end up in these debates with people where they're like, could you prove it with blockchain? Could you do this? I'm like, no, you're fundamentally misunderstanding that direct trade is not the preference of every producer at all. And a lot of what I wrote about in the book was saying, let's take away the white savior, Northern Hemisphere. I know you're in the Southern Hemisphere, but generally it's a Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere dynamic. And say, okay, so one of the things I tried to do with that book is say, well, what if it was in the UK, right? So one of the few upsides of rising global temperatures are that England is actually quite a good place to grow wine now, certain types of styles of wine. And so I said to friends of mine in wine, can I see a business model for wine? And they said, sure, here you go. And I said, look, Max, if you're going to do it, I was never going to do it. I just, I would love to, but I've got the coffee business, the powerlifting, and now I'm trying to do this converted barn. So I don't think the vineyard's going to happen, but never say never. But
Match cut to a year later, him being like, I've got a vineyard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've definitely learned to sort of never emphatically say that I won't do something. I used to say that after every World British Championship, never doing this again. And then I'd come back.
Next year.
But yeah, exactly. But what I was going to say there was they said to me, look, Max, it's a 12-year break even. So really tough going. You're probably going to have to run a hospitality business on the vineyard to start with. And actually, if you can't get a minimum of 25 hectares, you shouldn't do it. You're just going to lose money, right? So when we view it without all of this idea of helping a farmer or producer, and we look at it just as a business case model, and this is what Caravella do a lot in Latin America, which is rather than saying, hey, if you focus on quality coffee, you're going to pay more for it, and then it's going to be great for you, is going, well, actually, hang on a minute. If you're only got 2 hectares of land, there is no scenario where that is a long-term sustainable living. It doesn't matter how much you pay, right? And so a lot of our narrative is, hey, we're direct trade and we work with smallholders. Now, you see this whole aging farming population discussion, and it's like, okay, what if there's an aging farming population, that means younger generations are not farming coffee. Why not? Because they've got other economic opportunities. We see it as a negative thing in coffee. I'm like, looks like a positive thing to me. Looks like there's more economic opportunity, that you don't have to do coffee because you've got no other choice, right? And so this is one thing I came round to writing that book. And honestly, these bits in the middle of that business book, trying to understand, the pressure on me was to be like, yeah, I'm pro direct trade. I'm in favor of smallholder farming, all these things. But the logic of studying it was going, no, Max, that's not. And I had to keep studying it. It took me ages to write that bit. And I was like, it's that bit where I'm like, I definitely think it's this, but everyone wants me to say this, right? So, and I came to the conclusion that smallholder farming in a modern globalized world that we live in is only at best a stepping stone towards doing something else. And so if you were to say in coffee, what do those models look like? You would say, well, actually, I say it like a cafe. If someone opens a cafe in England, there's 3 owners, I'm like, disaster. There's no way that one cafe is making the 3 of you enough money. So what's going to happen is when you all realize that after year 3 or 4, either one of you is going to buy the other 2 out, you'd shut it down and go open your own thing, or you'll just do something else entirely. And this is the same thing with coffee farming. I'm trying to say, like, what does sustainable coffee farming look like? And I just don't think most coffee companies have really considered that. They're just basing everything they do off this very simplistic approach of, we're helping to focus on quality and pay a bit more. And generally my belief on quality coffee, which I also don't like, is we pay more for something that's worth more. We're not paying, we're not going and buying something cheap and saying, hey, here's a premium to make it more sustainable. The majority of the specialty coffee industry benefits producers in a position who are well-resourced, speak English, and I'm not against these famous producers at all. I think it's great. But I think it's really weird. You wouldn't do this in wine. Yeah, let's go buy wine from the famous vineyards and say that makes us an ethical wine trading company, right? Yeah. There's a lot of this very contradictory, strange conversation. And so just coming back to the direct trade point, which was your original question, is if I have got a sustainable coffee business that I can make money from, just like a roastery that's got to a certain scale, you start to go, well, who do we want to sell to? That little cafe that buys 10 kilos a week and is a nightmare to work with, it doesn't make us any money. It's just fiddly. Actually, it's our clients that have hit certain scale. And then we look at distributors. Everyone else in the coffee industry loves distribution. Some of the brands want to do, when they get big enough, want to have their own offices in a country, like, we talked about, like Breville or Sage. But a lot of the industry like to distribute, because if I can sell a load of coffee to one client who buys it in bulk, right? I don't have all of the admin of, they then go and sell it to lots of other people. So we say with green coffee, who would you rather work with year on year? Cafe Imports, who said, look, we want to buy a range of qualities from you, and we will go and market and do all that for you. You don't have to do any of that. And we'll buy, the volume may change year on year, but we're well financed. We've got Swiss money. All of the big green traders got Swiss money. Like, it's a sure bet. You want to distribute. So this idea that direct trade is better, I'm like, well, hang on a minute. Like, a lot of the time, it's not even the preferable way to do business. And you're building your whole narrative off the idea that it's like virtuously better, right? So yeah, that is my long example.
Good example
to your question.
Also, I think we've had a few people kind of over the last few episodes and weeks kind of like, I feel like there's this turn at the moment where, and maybe it's you that was saying it, that kind of started the turn, but there's been a turn of people starting to look at the difference between trade and, these bigger importers and that kind of stuff. And maybe the importers aren't the devil that, has kind of been thrown out there.
Yeah, the role that they have to play in supporting kind of this ecosystem.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of work as well to manage all of that and market it and do all that side of work.
I would say, on that same point, I would say I agree that you see this like industry chatter and stuff move over time. And it's just interesting watching it all change, especially I wrote that book. I sort of wrote the majority of it in like 2023. And even though we had this sort of spike in 22, I think the more price volatility you have and the higher it has, like naturally the whole narrative shifts like super quick, right? Yeah. And it's interesting. I was talking to, you've got these historical low prices that are just consistently low. And of course, you're going to get a bunch of coffee companies saying, well, is there a way to trade coffee that combats this? Because naturally, in a globalized market, smaller producers are going to struggle to compete at scale. So, but then it's funny that the whole global price pops up and suddenly the narrative is, less prescient, basically. You're like, it's not as important as it was. And this is the interesting thing about any kind of ethical business. I think this outside of coffee, which is if you solve the problem that you have set out to solve, you don't actually have a business anymore, because you're like, you need the problem to exist for you to be the unique solution, right? But just the bit that I think is slightly more contentious is, which maybe people are coming around to, as well as the importer thing, because when you do the maths on the importers, they take all the risk, they finance the whole industry, and they've also adapted, right? They're so much more transparent and traceable than they used to be. So they've really caught up and gone. There was when I was interviewing Peter Giuliano about this, and I know who was the other person who used to be the head of Rick Reinhardt, who used to be the head of the SCA. He said that when email came out, that Ted Lingle, another old school coffee person, they started messaging each other. And Rick Reinhardt was like, Ted, this is it. The whole coffee industry is going to change because the producer and the roaster can now talk to each other via email, right? And then Ted was like, no, because who's going to finance it all? Like, they can talk to each other, but it still all needs financing, right? And that's still the case, right? But just to come back to that point I wanted to make is that the bit I think maybe people will come round to, this is why I don't like the word specialty, is that I don't like the delineation between commercial coffee and specialty. And I was making the point before that you need to be in a certain position to maximize your growing opportunity as a coffee producer in specialty. And I think actually you could have so many commercial coffee operations focused on sustainable living. And I think I'm pro-commercial coffee, right? And I think that's the other thing, talking to people who are learning about the industry more, that, there's a brand in the UK called Pact, and I love Will, the head of coffee, but when they came out with this marketing saying the coffee industry's broken, we're fixing it, like, I just totally disagree. There's actually a lot about the coffee industry that does work well, and specialty often over believes in itself as this solution to a broken industry.
Yeah. There's the narrative about, kind of, as you said, that white savior kind of narrative, and the specialty savior narrative is definitely very strong there. And I think we kind of tell that too often.
So I was kind of missing that point. Are you saying that you think that the commercial side is more viable for the producing countries? Is that kind of what you were saying, or I missed that?
I mean, naturally, right? Then the majority of the industry will be commercial coffee.
Yep.
So this is what So I come from an art background, which we haven't touched on. So I actually loved hospitality so much that I gave up art, and my dad, who's a sculptor, is still upset about it. He still asks me, when are you going to stop doing coffee and go back to artwork, right? But in the world of art, each artist, or if it's a collective or a movement, you would naturally do your own thing. And your projects are contained. They're your project, and everyone has a different project. And so I love small contained projects. Like when I end up having this debate with people, it starts to be a competition about who can have the most impact. And I'm like, no, I don't think we all need to try and have this massive impact either. Like we can do something small, which is great and lovely. That works as well. But if we do want to talk about impact, then yeah, you don't look great in specialty, right? It's the narrative impact is massive, but the actual economic impact is much smaller than specialty says it is. And I'm basically pro-commercial coffee, and I don't like this idea that we say specialty coffee is where all of the sustainability is. You're like, what? It doesn't. When you actually study the industry, that doesn't make any sense at all. And there's a ton of sustainable work in the commercial sector, and arguably, it's more well positioned to do it. Right? It's the
larger scale and.
Of course, and you've got, teams of sustainability people and, certifications and the ISO certifications and B Corps and everything else. So, I think for me, coffee's a spectrum. I don't like the word specialty because I think it creates this false separation that over here is commercial coffee, which is atrocious, and specialty over here, which is like the angels of coffee. I think it's all much more mixed than that. And I actually think it's more mixed than that, not just commercially in terms of economics, but it actually in flavor as well. I don't believe there is this, like when someone says to me, like, oh, instant coffee is horrific. You're like, have you tasted it? It's not. It's just bland. It's fine. Right.
So we splice in you at the start saying it's like, well, the coffees I like are just expensive coffees.
Yeah. No, there is definitely a spectrum. I'm not saying for 2 seconds at all that the coffee industry is all emperor's new clothes at all. Like there is absolutely a difference. But I think sometimes the difference is to make the movement feel more powerful. Yeah. It has to be so far away from the thing that it's different to, right?
I mean, we've gone down some interesting different angles of discussion here, which is really great because I think that it does kind of come back to this overarching idea that we started with. If you're beginning on your coffee journey, or even if you're taking the next stage through it, there's all of this complexity, all of this kind of gray and subtlety and context that we need to tackle, right? And I guess what I'm hearing from you, Maxwell, a couple of things that really jumped out about, okay, there's the craft and the physical aspect of making coffee or some roles within industry, whether you're a production roaster or a barista behind the bar, that are the physical skills. There's the process of that. And it's for you, that learning process is muscle memory, like do it again and again and again and refine that and be kind of hyper competitive is what I'm hearing from you as well. I think that's really check yourself.
Did you get that?
Yeah, I picked that one up. I knew that before we started this podcast. But I think as well that when we think about the theory side of learning as well, that you were kind of talking about some really cool concepts there of kind of maybe creating a meta-analysis, go to someone who is very knowledgeable, experienced, throw out your kind of like, here's a statement of what I know about this, but be ready to listen to conflicting kind of argument or to be told that you're wrong. And I think that's actually critical. There's a couple of critical things in here for us learning about coffee or learning about anything is be ready to be wrong and know that you don't know probably the majority of stuff out there, right? So it's a shifting landscape of learning. But then also, even with the physical kind of process of baristing and like pulling shots behind the bar is also being aware of where your constraints are or what are the things that's holding that back. Because I don't know, you were a barista as well, Rowan, for time, but I think there has to be like a level of awareness. Like your example of the vineyard workers, working on the vines. Yes, there's muscle memory, but there's also has to be an awareness of like, wow, I was really slow at moving from getting my cups down and positioning them for the next shot, or what could I be doing here and here? Yeah, so I think there's kind of skills there that we need to refine in how we approach theory learning and the physical process.
Well, I think it's like for me, a lot of this is taking pride in what you do, right? So the being the competitive side is funny because I'm very competitive, but this is what I didn't like about Barista Comps, right? Which is I came to the belief, I think it's an analysis, that it's ultimately a talent show. And that means it is subjective, like very subjective, and that's fine. So there's only so much you can learn within a very subjective framework. You have to understand where the limitations of learning lie. And I would say the same in coffee, which is, yes, be ready to be wrong. And we're all going to be wrong a lot about coffee, because we're trying to do, when you go into the sciencey side of coffee, which I've done a lot of, from a scientific point of view, coffee is very challenging. It's so many variables. It's quite abnormal as a subject. So we're all going to be wrong a lot because it's extremely difficult to study. But then when we come back to the taste side, the taste side, no one's ever going to be right about. So that there's going to be preference, right? And even if we get a group of people who agree, which is, I think it's a self-fulfilling thing, which is I'm in Melbourne, I naturally taste something that's a high-scoring coffee and I love it. So for me, what specialty coffee rewards is very natural to me because it aligns with my preferences, right? But I've had people work with me and friends and family where their initial reaction isn't the same. So their whole experience is completely different. They've actually got to go and learn to not just pick what they like and actually think really hard about what the framework for rewarding something is. But I would say that I think a lot of people who end up in specialty coffee are naturally people who like that coffee. And then you end up with an echo chamber because there's a ton of people out there who don't agree. But obviously they're not in the industry because they don't agree. So do you see what I mean? So, but I do think trying to learn when we've got this subjective preference element means we need to be realistic about what the limitations can be in some of this learning, right? We have to go, look, there's only so much we can have a conclusive answer on this particular part of it, right?
What level of for people that are working in the industry now, I feel like you have this tension between the trends and whatever's changing and this idea of maintenance and keeping that up. Can you explore that a bit more with us?
Yeah, of course. So, I'm probably a very good example of, you look at the range of projects I'm involved in, and I am involved in a lot of innovative stuff. And naturally, when I would find myself on a stage, whether it's at BaristaCon, but I was giving a talk or being interviewed, naturally you gear towards these interesting, innovative ideas, right? Because they're interesting.
Yeah.
I keep using that word a lot, but they naturally make good content. And I think a few years ago, I was reading this article. It was actually a podcast, but it was an article on LinkedIn or something about how most industries overvalue. We put the spotlight on innovation too much because it's flashy and exciting, and don't put enough focus and reward on the idea of maintenance. And they talk about this throughout, I like the word maintenance because it sounds dull. Right. So I think I quite like that. It's sort of is a good friction because it's like, saying that for society to run well, civilizations to even exist, a lot of what makes them exist is maintenance, right? It's like looking after things, and looking after something might not be even to the vineyard example, that's iterative improvement. But actually looking after something might not be about improvement. And when I got into hospitality, I kind of loved this idea early, before I found coffee, that you could have a family restaurant or a bakery or something. And a bit like the Jiro Loves Sushi thing, right? Which if people listening don't know it, it's this incredible sushi restaurant in Japan. And the whole story is about his son taking over. And he's been doing it, I can't remember how old he was, but he's very old. He's been doing it his whole life. And I guess maybe in this modern age of new ideas and new technology all the time, we often lose the appreciation of just doing something well without changing it, just doing it well day in, day out. And I believe the best hospitality places are doing that. They're not reinventing the wheel. They understand the fundamentals and they just do them really well. And actually maintaining that over time requires discipline because it's not new and exciting. So where's the motivation to keep doing it to a very high standard? And the same at a roastery, right? Production roasting. Often a lot of the coffee types that we call them don't want to do the production roasting. They want to do the green sauce thing, and they want to do the profiling, the stuff that's tinkering and new stuff. But really, what's that business built on? Probably really built on roasting coffee really well every day with people who have great attention to detail, to have a lot of pride in what they do. They don't put out bad coffee. And then how do you win business in this industry? The majority of it is not flashy marketing. It's commercial relationships. It's nurturing them, fostering them over time. And this stuff isn't about innovation at all. It's about fundamental principles and taking pride in doing them well. So yeah, I'm not for 2 seconds saying these things are mutually exclusive. And in fact, coffee is a great example of how these things can sit side by side. I just often, for example, I'll give you an example of the sort of innovation where I think this obsession with innovation results in like a negative experience, right? I'm not going to name names, but back in this would have been like 2014, 15, there's a very well-known coffee shop in London. And obviously I tend to have, not these days, I'm not as well known these days, Lance and James are, but back then I would walk in and the baristas would know who I was, and I was doing the barista comps. So I would get a different experience, right? So maybe I have to view my experiences through that prism. But anyway, I ordered an espresso and I paid for it. I can't remember what it was back then. Let's say £2.50. And they brought it over to me and I said, oh, thanks very much. I'm looking forward to trying it. And they were like, yeah, so we've been trying this new technique where we do this with the ground coffee and then we stick it in a vacuum and then we, do this different pressure, etc. And I was like, oh, cool. So, what's it like? And they're like, yeah, it doesn't taste very good. And I'm like, I just paid money for this. Right. But it's a great example where one of my barista competitions, I said to the roaster, hey, I have this idea that I want to have the same roast profile and different resting dates. Can you do that for me? He said, yeah. Then they all turn up just before the barista competition. They've all got the same roast date on them and they've got different end temps on them. Right. And I'm like, what did you do? And he's like, oh, I thought this was more interesting. I'm like, you what? You did what? But there's a lot of this attitude, which is the exploration is the most important thing. And actually delivering a quality result is less important. Right. And then as this flows through to the customer, this is all at the expense of the customer. And I just believe like innovation and R&D should be absolutely separate. And you should take a lot of pride in the way the SOPs you've designed and say, hey, we are using this water system. We are preparing the coffee like this. Now, we've all had this experience in coffee where I say for me, this happens, the learning point, this happens frequently, which is I do lots of studying, lots of experimentation, come to the best conclusion I can at that time of what I think the best representation of the coffee is. This could be like an approach to roasting or brewing or water. And then I crack on with that for a while. And then something will happen that makes me rethink it. Or I'm like, maybe I missed something. Maybe we're roasting our coffee for slow immersion brews and it's not tasting good on, pour over bypass brews, no bypass brews. And then you end up in that typical cycle we all end up in coffee, which is you can't do it all at once. You're trying to find a proposition which works really well. People end up in different positions. Some roasters like, hey, you need to use this grinder, this water, otherwise we don't care. Like, don't phone us up and tell it tastes bad. There's another approach you could take of saying, well, actually, we could create something that tastes good in lots of environments, but can we make it taste great in every environment? No. Anyway, so I go through these periods and I do the same in my weightlifting. I study it, I read all the theories, and then I just do several months of just lifting. And it's the same in coffee. And then I just do several months of just trying to do a good job every day, right? And then you rethink it. But I don't think you should be rethinking on the fly in the business or on the customer's time, right? So, but that roaster who did that for my barista competition, he said, look, Max, if I'm really structured, if I focus on consistency, then there's all these great roast profiles I never would have found. That's his argument, right? But I just think that's the conflict there, right? And I think that shop I went into, they clearly valued experimentation over delivering what they thought was the best quality product. They were more excited to tell me that they did something interesting with the way it was brewed, and it didn't faze them at all. Like, honestly, it was dead serious. They told me the coffee wasn't very good. Like, I struggled
only
not
after
to
you
laugh.
paid. Only after you'd paid. So,
yeah.
I mean, this all makes sense. But how do you balance this tension, right? Between, like, I get what you're saying of innovate not on the customer's time, but there's also maybe innovation is the line of
also,
like big wholesale change, right? But then there's iteration and kind of that continuous improvement. Like, you were out there on the vineyard pruning and tending in a really crap way.
That's not innovation.
No.
Yeah. So, I mean, we use the word innovation very loosely, especially in coffee, right? Which is as you know, so I do work outside of my coffee business with the primary project I've got going is with a biotech inventor who invented the world's smallest DNA analyzing machine. And
Classic side hustle.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm doing the
yeah.
same.
Yeah.
And he hates biotech. Everyone sues each other, super high risk. And he's loved coffee for years and he's always been tinkering. Anyway, he sold his biotech business and invested it all in coffee R&D. And I've always been interested in innovation and R&D. And near my coffee shop in Bath, not too far away, is Dyson, the vacuum business as well.
Fabulous.
A lot of creatives. I'm a big believer if you do something interesting, it's like a magnet and people come to you. And so my Bath shop has always been like that. And so we've had a lot of designers come and stuff. And, you know, I'm not just interested in coffee. I like lots of creative fields. But the reason I'm bringing this up is often the level and quality of innovation and design in coffee is very low. And I don't mean that in a mean way. That's just, I think, an appropriate analysis looking at the industry. And I think that for a few reasons. And this is why I think at-home coffee is actually the most interesting thing for the coffee industry, because innovation is driven by commercial opportunity. We sort of live in a world with, you know, we've got the onset of AI, but even before that, this just belief that everything will ultimately improve to an event horizon, just constant improvement. But things only improve if there's a commercial reason for it to do so. And because the coffee industry is predominantly driven by B2B businesses, the sales rates in B2B businesses are quite low. You're not going to sell a roaster to a roastery very often, like once every 3 or 4 years if they're growing. And I think you see very low levels of innovation when in those kind of industries, because there's just not enough commercial opportunity for companies to go and put their cleverest minds into competing for that market, because it's not very valuable. They're off in biotech, or they're off in consumer goods, or they want to work at Apple, right? So then when I met one of these designers who's part of James's team, James is the biotech inventor who's invested all of his money in coffee R&D. And he's basically saying, look, I don't want to be a brand or a manufacturer. I want to create really innovative solutions, like truly innovative, like patents that are actually meaningful and that you could actually defend. Because so many of the patents, everyone's like, oh, do you have a patent? And so many of them would never be tested and actually are just worthless bits of paper, right? And they wouldn't, and no one enforces them anyway. All the coffee machine manufacturers are like, oh, we've got a patent for the scales. And then someone else puts some scales in a drip tray. They're like, yeah, it's okay, we won't take you to court. But this designer called Luke, he was at Dyson. Before that, he was at Jaguar Land Rover. And he went to Dyson because they had this car project. Dyson wanted to make an electric car. And Dyson realized that actually they were so far behind that by the time they launched, all the other car manufacturers would catch them up. And so he shut the project down. He lost billions on it. And this is also amazing about Dyson. Most people don't know this about Dyson. They've got so many design teams. They split their business in half. It's new product innovation and new product development. So their idea of new product innovation is starting from scratch. So they looked at coffee, actually, which is why they got in touch with me. And they called it the kitchen's arm of what they were doing. And they have designers given loads of money to go and develop ideas to a full working prototype. And then if it's deemed to be interesting, they will put it into new product development, which is trying to commercialize it. As you know, Dyson really only have 4 products, which is the vacuum cleaner, air purifiers, hand dryers, and hair straighteners. And so every year they come up with amazing ideas that just never come to market, because James Dyson is just like, no, unless it's truly innovative and truly disruptive and can make a huge commercial impact, is never going to come to market. Now I'm sort of straying off topic here, but I'm fascinated by innovation. And you would never have his approach in a business owned by shareholders, because they'd be like, why are we spending all this money on ideas that never come to market? So he truly believes in that. And I think leadership is actually something really important in A, small business, and B, innovation. You need like strong-minded leaders. And obviously, you know, a lot of people like, this is one of my, where I sort of had friction with the SCA, everything had to be agreed by a committee. And, you know, there are places where committee is valuable, but it also has a lot of limitations. So coming back to innovation, Luke presented to me this Russian engineer's theory of innovation. There's 5 levels of innovation. And he's basically saying level 1 is very low level of innovation. It might be, to your point, Ben, a slight iteration, like a slightly more ergonomic handle or a pouring spout, like a tweak, right? And so then level 2 would be putting 2 things together that are already seen in that industry but have not been integrated. So that would be like putting scales in a drip tray, right? That's a level 2. Then a level 3 is taking technology that exists in another industry and bringing it into yours. right? So I would say we're seeing that with Colombian producers with, yeast and bacteria techniques from wine and beer into these highly interventionist coffees that now taste like soap. Not for me, but still very interesting. But they are interesting from an innovation point of view, right? And, back to the coffee thing earlier, those coffees, there's millions that have gone into that innovation. That's not like a smallholder craft project. That is a heavily funded projects, those. Then you go to level 4 and 5. Now, level 4 and 5 are based around fundamental scientific principles. So the highest level of innovation is a scientific breakthrough, like the discovery of X-ray, right? And then number 4 would be making an X-ray machine. And so James and Luke's point is the coffee is flooded with stage 1 and 2s, a few stage 3s, but hardly any stage 4 and 5, right? And so, but stage 4 and 5 are where the most value is, but they're also the hardest to find. So you'll always see, if you look at patents, stage 1 has the most patents. There's just thousands and thousands of them, right? Loads of people have like ideas of slight tweaks. I was saying to someone the other day that commercially, I think the sweet spot for innovation isn't level 5. Level 5 is so game-changing, it requires people to change their approach. It requires a behavior change by clients and customers. And I spent a bit of time out in Silicon Valley with the founders of Eventbrite, who also invested in Airbnb and Uber and everything. And I said to Kevin Hart, he's one of the founders and chairman of Eventbrite, and he's invested in loads of businesses, SpaceX, everything. I said, over your 20 odd years in this space, why do you think some things don't work? Do you think it's like the wrong people or the wrong managing director, or the funding's wrong or the marketing's wrong? And he just said it's always timing, which is someone comes along with a really innovative idea and it completely fails. And then 4 years later, someone does the exact same thing and it flies. And it's just because the timing was right. So I think, real high level innovation, there hasn't been a lot of it in coffee. I do believe we're in a place, though, where people are more behaviorally open to that change. And I think it's the D2C businesses that will drive the change because they've got more reason to. They can sell more units and they also have a problem to solve. So what I've said about the baristas for years is if you're baristas, it's baristas who are using the new equipment, they make a lot of allowances for the equipment, which is good for the company, but not great for innovation. They blame themselves. They're like, oh, I need to be a better barista, or maybe I need to distribute the coffee differently, or maybe I need to come up with a different profile. And a lot of the onus is on the barista. But when you move into the home space, you've got, especially the ones that are selling lots of units and making more money. So I'm not talking about the home space as the super high-end grinder that costs 10 grand. I'm talking about the consumer space as the $500 machine, right?
Travel, the DeLonghi, the Ninja.
Exactly, right? They've got a problem to solve, which is there are more people than ever who want a high-quality coffee experience. They don't self-identify as a coffee nerd, but they have a limited capacity to fiddle around with a piece of equipment, and they get annoyed quickly and send it back quickly. That is a huge commercial opportunity, and so I believe these are the companies who are really being driven to make true improvements. And I believe that all the B2B innovation on countertop in cafe won't come from cafe anymore. It will come from these companies who are actually solving problems, and then that'll funnel its way back into the B2B space.
We were talking about this quite a few episodes ago. We were saying, I was like, the innovation that we're seeing at home is going to be what's going to start trickling down into the cafe and across there, because you can see it's funny whenever these companies like a Breville or whatever launch a new automated thing or a thing that makes it easier, you get all of the specialty nerds ripping into it in the comments because they're the loudest. What they don't realize is they're 0.5% or whatever it is, a very small margin. And there are thousands of people out there buying this auto-tamping, self-dosing, whatever machine because it pumps out something that's maybe 2/3 of what you'd get at a cafe or whatever. And it's, hey, that's pretty good for making it at home,
Yeah. This is. I feel like I've just gone back to school. I could just keep listening to Maxwell, and I would be getting all of this knowledge, keep soaking in, and my brain's sparking off about where do we put our energy? And I bet our listeners are probably going to be thinking the same, Maxwell. So what I want to do is see if we can, pull in some of these threads of this conversation and turn it into. Are there any ways that we can summarize some of these ideas into actions that people can go and take back out and apply in their coffee journey? We've kind of talked about learning, we've talked about like maintenance, But if you're a coffee roaster or a barista or kind of starting a business, what are some techniques? And Rowan, you...
Yeah, no, I was just going to like, from a summary side of like looking at what we've talked about, it felt like, there's this idea of the business and hospitality and getting your hands dirty and just doing it and getting better. And then separating that idea of innovation or growth or knowledge or learning as a separate entity altogether. Thinking about how people working in the industry could separate those things, as we saw you had a terrible experience where someone's experimenting with you as the customer paying, which doesn't feel like the right model. Also, sometimes for people, it sounds like, hey, stop complaining. Sometimes you're going to have to do stuff for a bit that isn't the most fun, and you got to, get your grit on and get down and dirty with it and just do it. But yeah, what do you think about that? Was kind of what I was taking from our conversation.
Love it. I wish you could be in all my conversations to summarize my big rambling thought processes. Yeah, absolutely agree. I think separating the two out is key. And I would say also thinking a little bit further down the road is something I encourage people to do. I talk to all my staff about it, which is try and look at this from a career point of view rather than be surprised by the dead end that you hit, right? Which is, there is no job in coffee where the primary role of that job is just to explore coffee. It just doesn't exist, right? So actually you need to go, like I said before, you need to love the work and be passionate about doing the work well, but also look at the roles and go, what are the professional capabilities of that role? Do I want a head of coffee job because it's important and has responsibility and I get to be, someone who gets to play with coffee? Or do I want to manage the risk of the market and a short or long position and manage all the stress of dealing with containers not arriving on time? And do I want to be in that position? Is that something that you thrive on? It's like I was talking to a friend the other day who worked in A&E, and he came to visit the roastery. He loves coffee. I actually met him on a flight to Greece, to World of Coffee Greece. He wasn't going there for World of Coffee, but we just started chatting about coffee on the plane, and he came to visit the roastery. And he said, yeah, people in A&E are adrenaline junkies, because if they weren't, it would be awful. They just have breakdowns, right? Because A&E is full on. And I think like a bit of that with coffee, which is, what are the potential jobs? I actually was thinking of writing a book called The Coffee Professional's Handbook, which was, trying, to your point, Ben, trying to get like, what are the key things to focus on to really figure out where I want to be in coffee and the kind of things I want to do. Now, just to be clear, I don't think you need to choose a job in coffee and stick in it at all. But you have to realize things like, if you're in hospitality and you got really good at it, because you will have if you're just sticking it out for a while, and a big part of what you liked was you worked with coffee, and then you go, okay, I want to go to the roasting. And people tell me this all the time. They're like, oh, I want career progression. I'm like, you do realize it will be a backward step. You're going to do a sideways step into an area you have no professional capabilities or background in. You're going to go into manufacturing, right? Or the common one is sales, right? Like, so many people who hate sales, but are in a sales role in coffee because they love coffee and they didn't really know where to go next, right? So I think I like the fact that you can jump across different roles in coffee and learn different professional skills. And you can come out of coffee and come back into coffee, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think you need to put a lot of energy into looking at the jobs available in an industry like coffee, which ones you could thrive in.
I was just going to say specifically on that, because I think this would be super helpful. I know like I had a lot of friends that did the thing of, I'm the head barista, and then they go work in roasting. And after a month, they're like, what did I do? Oh my God. Like what do you think? And I know people can do their own research, but what do you think is the maybe different paths of career progression from a barista that keep you in that lane of growth of where you've been rather than a completely different sidestep?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think it comes back to some of the points also around like values, right? So I think you have to be like, for me, it was just very obvious, right? And I don't know why it's not obvious to everyone, but when I was in Melbourne, I was like, okay, I can work in a really busy CBD cafe, which is not that specialist or boutique, but I will get paid way more, right? But I've got to be good. I've got to be fast. I've got to have, high quality standards, memorize people's orders, but I could earn more. Or I can go out to one of the boutique projects in the suburbs, which is really interesting from a learning exposure point of view, but I will take half the money to do that, right? And, a lot of people find this a sad truth, but it is what it is. Small boutique projects that generate less value in terms of money will be able to pay less. So there's another challenge here about people getting to a certain point in their life where they've got responsibilities, whether it's kids or they want to get a mortgage or whatever. And they have to go, okay, well, the commercial opportunity here is to work in more commercial roles in more commercial coffee businesses to make more money, right? And I think that's something that a lot of coffee people struggle with, because they often felt like, oh, I found this industry where I can be less businessy. I can, it's more casual. It's more about pursuing my passion, and then come to the realization that actually career-wise, that has limitations, unless you want to do what I would say is the most common career development in an industry like coffee, especially the boutique side, which is start your own thing, right? Often people are like, oh, what's the career development? I'm like, well, it's obvious, isn't it? It's start your own thing. But if you don't want to do that, fine. You don't have to stay in coffee either. There's this other thing that people have where they feel like it's the sunken cost fallacy. Like, I've got to stay in coffee, right? It's part of my identity. I'm in coffee. And that might be the conclusion you come to as well, which is you love coffee, you worked in it for years, but the avenues available to you don't fit. Because some people like me, like I was always going to be my own boss, right? I knew that early. I was like, very quickly, I learned from some other businesses and I was like, cool, I'm ready to learn on my own time now. Whereas then I do some consultancy for people who are like, they just want to keep studying and keep learning, and they're just putting off opening their own thing, just putting it off. And I'm like, you just need to do it. You've done more research than don't do it, one or the two, right? But you have done more than enough research. You just need to start doing it. And, as we all know, like, we probably live in a society where entrepreneurialism is glamorized and being this startup founder and all this kind of stuff. But there's lots of stress that comes to it. It can be quite lonely. And there's, a lot of challenges. And I remember listening to a podcast where, I can't remember which one it was, but this person phoned in and said, oh, it was like a startup podcast, and said, I've been offered this incredible job at Google and all of these perks and that, but I'm thinking I should just start my own thing. And the host was like, just take the job, take the Google job. It's incredible. There's hardly, these jobs don't exist on planet. There's so many pros. Don't go and start your own thing. So, and I think these are all things that we all learn, not just in coffee, but just in general, right? About like the pros and cons of either being an employee or being your own boss. And I think these are all the things for people to consider with coffee. And one of the things I do, which I don't want it to be negative, but I often give chats about the business of coffee, and I talk about how challenging it is. It's very competitive. It's more competitive than ever. There's very little actual IP. So, but I also like the fact that the coffee industry can support thousands and thousands of businesses, and small businesses and stuff, right? So a lot of it is about expectation. But I think generally a theme that comes out of when I share my learnings on the industry is that it is tough. And if you're up for a challenge and you're really passionate about it, and in the book, there's this Venn diagram of the three circles. The top one, which is very common now in business speak because of Simon Sinek, which is what you're really passionate about. What is your why? I don't personally like that on its own that much. And then there's a second circle, which is what are you really good at? The business thinker who actually came up with this Venn diagram says, what are you the best in the world at? But I think that's a bit arrogant. It's a bit much. It's like,
nothing.
You don't need to be the best. You don't need to be the best in the world at it, but you do need to be pretty good at it, right?
Yeah.
And then the last one is the one that, we've talked about quite a bit in this interview, which is what makes money. The term in that circle in the diagram is actually what drives your economic engine. But there's loads of great examples here, right? Of like, you're really passionate about it, but, you're not actually, you don't have a competitive edge. You're not better than anyone else. Or you are really good at it and you're really passionate about it, but it just doesn't make money. Like my brother wanted to make handmade guitars. That industry basically died years ago. There's hardly any opportunity there. And so it's not to try and be negative and put people off, but it's just kind of plant these seeds of how challenging it might be. And then if you're like, you know what, F you, Max, I'm going to make it work. I'm like, great. You've got the right ingredients here.
It takes the person to say F you to be like, okay, maybe they actually will succeed at it then.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. And I think I was get back to tying this background to my greenwashing point from earlier. A lot of people's interaction with the industry is encouraging them to either work in coffee or open coffee businesses because it benefits that individual. They get to sell another roaster or some green coffee. or whatever, right? So I think, think really hard about the challenges of the industry, but also, I love it. I love working in coffee. I feel privileged that I've had this opportunity, that I stumbled across it when I did. And I think there is lots of opportunity in the industry. I don't think it's, I think there's a lot more growth, a lot more opportunity, and there's more people into great coffee than ever before, which is creating lots of opportunity. And then from a learning point of view, I agree with that separation piece, but I think you need to think, really, you should be learning both things, right? So you should be trying to learn professional skills as well as coffee.
I was just trying to think about it as well while you were speaking. Maybe not as much for it still applies to the roasters and cafe owners, but specifically like the baristas and that. There are also like side pieces. It doesn't have to be the whole thing, but like, the media side of thing and the knowledge share and doing that is one side. Like I know here at, It's Just Coffee, and with like my companies, that we're always looking for people that, are deeply passionate about coffee and that skill set and wanting to apply it into that kind of space. And then if media or doing it that way, whether it's research or being on camera isn't your thing, there are these other bigger companies that are investing in that kind of understanding of recipes, knowledge, experience, whether it be like, people doing signature drinks with Monin, or whether it be working with Milk Lab to create like, they're doing roaster royales
also,
and working
I think, I think that point's really interesting, because it's something I'd like to make, which is, how earlier I got a bit ranty pushing back on direct trade. No, but my point there was, there's this fundamental belief that that's the best way to do it, and the debate is about how to do it. And I'm like, no, it might not be the best way to do it. And I would say the same thing here, which is there's an inference with what I said before. You can't necessarily earn a lot of money in the boutique space, so you need to go to the more commercial space. And the subtext there it is, potentially you have to go and make money to do a less interesting or less enjoyable job. I would also like to make the point that often larger companies are much nicer places to work as well, which is, I see this a lot in coffee, which is lots of small companies are very passionate, but, they're like families, they lack structure, they often lack professionalism, there's no HR, there's often not a structured learning process. And if I'm a startup and I'm a small company, right, I don't actually have the time to train everyone, because I'm small, I don't have a lot of bandwidth, I'm probably breaking even or struggling to make a profit. So I can't build this amazing training program. And so often, larger companies can offer things smaller ones can't. It's not a step down necessarily, right? There's lots of great things to be learned and experiences to be had working in larger coffee companies, which is part of this narrative we talked about before, about people going, actually, green companies aren't that bad, and actually commercial coffee is not that bad. And, similarly, I love small boutique contained projects, but I think there's a lot of amazing value and experience to be had working in larger coffee companies.
Agreed.
So I think to kind of summarize some of this, what this is all clicked into my mind as is, one, the starting point is know your context. Know what is it that you're trying to achieve as a business, as a professional, and then that's going to define what's important to go and learn and refine. And then the second piece is kind of going that there's an awareness that we're talking about of what are the real skills here that are needed, and looking internally at like, do I have those skills? Am I interested in those skills? Will I keep doing them if they're outside of coffee? And once you kind of get those, then it's kind of the same with that career progression conversation, is that, once you're aware of the core skills that you have, you can look at how to pass those, obviously translate them into either the next evolution or next usage of those skills, or into a different application and context. Like, are you going into a different industry? Are you going to take those hospitality skills you learned and turn them into a great customer service role in a different industry? Or are you going to evolve them into that next step within coffee that might be something like, I'm going to go and be great at teaching and talking about these things. And I have this knowledge or this sunk knowledge or these particular skills, and I'm going to utilize those in the next evolution of this higher value. Like you're saying, I make great drinks at work. I'm going to actually go and make great drinks in front of a camera, or I'm going to make great drinks
for this company.
For a company.
I'm going to share that. And another thing that's not always in people's wheelhouse, but is just go out, share, talk to people, ask the questions. A lot of these things aren't going to be thrown in your lap. You have to write the email. Like someone isn't just going to call you and be like, oh, we need a new head of innovation for drinks at our, home espresso machine thing. But if you send an email to someone going like, hey, I've got these skill sets, I think we could work together. Maybe 9 out of 10 will say no, but one of them will be like, oh my God, we're actually just launching a program right now. We're trying to do this and it works out. And also to your point, it's a little bit different from scientific research, but I think you can apply your scientific kind of research study to just being a barista as well, of going out and talking to a lot of professionals, finding what the common threads that you find, and then speaking to other people and sharing that and seeing what their response is. Do they go, no, that's wrong because of this? I feel like it's a good way just to approach your general learning when talking and sharing.
I think you'll learn quicker, right, through other people's experience for sure, right? This is the beauty of other people's expertise and experience. And when I mentioned that approach, that's what I'm really trying to do. I'm trying to skip the queue. I'm trying to go, someone else has like studied this a lot. What can I glean from their experience first before I have to really think about it myself, right?
Absolutely. And it's getting a bit steamy in here. It's getting a little hot. I think it's time for an extra hot take with 2 sugars.
On to that. My cup is empty though. I need some more coffee in here.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the segment where we just get a little bit spicy, something that's maybe been like grinding our gears, something that we want to get off our chest. As the guest, I'm going to jump to you, Maxwell. Is there any little hot takes that you have for us?
I think for me, the hot take that I think about a lot is that specialty coffee is not as differentiated as it likes to see itself, right? And there isn't this separation. And I'm okay with that. I think we're maturing as an industry that it's all coffee and it doesn't need to be separate. But on that same point is that I think that often, the way we demonize commercial coffee as being like undrinkable and atrocious, it just doesn't exist. I think it's a construct that's sort of made up.
What do you think about the demonization of like Robusta?
I just think it's a different product, right?
Yep.
So my take, I do a few Robusta projects and I'm also looking at Excelsior as well. I don't know how much you know about that species, how much you've done on here. Caught up with Aaron Davies from Kew Gardens recently, and he does a lot of work on Excelsior because he says a lot of people, misunderstand Robusta. They think that Robusta is really resistant to climate change. And he's like, it's not. Like, it has some resistance that Arabica doesn't have, but actually it is also suffering, right? As we've seen with Vietnam and stuff. So, and I said to him about Excelsior, like, I think, the industry is built on washed Arabica, basically. However, I think that is all driven predominantly, the American market's the biggest market. I think the whole industry uses cupping. And I think it is a problem, right? Which everything we view in the industry is through cupped coffee, which is light filter strength coffee. And I think Robusta particularly struggles in that format. I'm not saying something people don't already know, but it does a lot better in espresso, which at these higher strengths and its potential strengths. What would I rather have a low quality Arabica or a low quality Robusta? I would rather have a low quality Arabica, but there is more of a focus on what can be done with Robusta. And I'm not in that field of people who say, oh, you taste this Robusta, it's like blows your mind, it's better than Arabica. My preference is still towards those aromatic, perfumed Arabica coffees, the expensive ones. But I do think there's some real strength to Robusta. And when you put it in certain equipment at certain strengths, it'll often be best. So I had a product that I presented to a client and I said, look, I think you should look at Robusta based on the way you're going to be brewing and serving. And they were like, no, it has to be 100% Arabica. And then on a blind taste test, they picked the Robusta blend, right? So I think there's definitely a lot of stigma. And I would imagine the whole 100% Arabica is part of what I was talking about before, which is creating that separation. So you've got a mission and you're like, no, we don't do that. We only do this. So I think there is an opportunity for Robusta to be seen in a less negative light. Yeah.
Well, the reason I asked you is because you were talking about marketing with all the greenwashing and those side of things. And it was me as a kid. I must have been like 12 years old when this was happening, but I saw the boom of advertising of it had to be 100% Arabica at your, even like 7-Elevens or like whatever, were like McDonald's putting up 100% Arabica, like none of that disgusting Robusta stuff.
And I think this is kind of interesting because I agree with you, Maxwell, on the sense of we need to not be so rigid with this is good, that's in the bad bucket, this is right, that is wrong. I think in that way lies danger. But I think the categorization and the framing of some of these things does allow us to have a groundwork to pursue, particular directions and create like a context to pursue things, like saying, okay, back in the day, Arabica has high quality flavors. We're pursuing flavors. We're talking about quality or a particular sensory experience in the cup, and commercial coffee is not considered around that. So it's like a product categorization. So when you said just then, Robusta is a different product, that in itself is a categorization. It's actually just coffee, right? It's all coffee.
It's just coffee.
It's just coffee,
Yeah.
as we like to say. But we are creating this kind of framework that allows us to then maybe innovate in a particular space or have focused conversations or whatever it is. We have to exclude and define a little bit in order to focus our thinking and our kind of process.
I agree with you. And I believe the pursuit of quality by default is categorization, right? So I think this about the weird coffees from Colombia, right? That taste like accidentally drinking hand soap, right? Which is, I was talking to a cup of excellence judge who was like, there's definitely a rewarding of intensity over complexity in a lot of scoring these days, etc. There's all these interesting debates. But you'll see people like myself and other people who've been in coffee for a long time who are like, not sure about these, and I really like clean washed coffee. And then you'll see people come out and say, the old guard, you're so narrow-minded. And I'm like, you do realize the pursuit of quality is about narrowness. That's what it's about, right? Otherwise, you don't care about anything. You're just like, it's all the same, right? As soon as you start saying we want to focus on an idea of quality, you are framing and categorizing and narrowing. So when I said before about we can end up in these like dichotomies, I'm not saying those shouldn't exist. They're a natural side product of focusing on quality, but very easily you can end up with dogmatic views that you probably need challenging, right? So the two are happening at the same time, which is like, let's narrow, let's focus on quality, but let's challenge it as we go and rethink it when necessary.
I think we've just gone down the most conceptual hot take ever.
Well, speaking of hot takes, Maxwell's a lot more interesting than me, and people over the time of us doing this podcast have heard enough. So I'm going to turn my hot take into asking a question and maybe trying to tee you up for a hot take, if we can here. We've talked a lot about the trends, innovation, all these kind of things. What is the biggest innovation in the coffee industry right now that you think is overrated and maybe not helping the coffee industry?
Oof. I think you hoped this would be an easier tee up. I don't know what you had in your mind.
I don't have anything. I just
No. It's
or the reverse of what is the biggest innovation that's underrated that people aren't, jumping onto.
Yeah, it's so when you ask me about learning, obviously this episode's a lot about learning. I'm like, whatever you think of Elon Musk, he's interesting in his approach to fundamental principles, which is taking a subject that everyone feels a certain way about and breaking it down into fundamental principles, right? And going, what really matters? And that's really kind of how I approach coffee. And I'm still interested in all of the detail and the argument about standard deviation of a certain preparation method or whatever. But what I'm also interested in saying, does it speak through the noise? Does it actually matter? And I would say that there is so much narrative in coffee, which just doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect the cup of coffee that much, And I'm like, well, what really matters? And obviously I'm biased because the projects I'm involved in. This is an issue we have in coffee, is everyone's biased, right? If you're the barista, you are exposed to playing with preparation. So you put emphasis on preparation because that's your experience. As a roaster, you're like, no, the barista doesn't matter that much. It's all about roasting. And then as the farmer, roasting is not that important. It's all about processing and cultivar, right? And so trying to strip all this back and see what matters, and I think brewing wise, grinding and water, I think the most important things, those two. I think I'm involved in a grinding project, but I think I know Lance does a lot on grinding and people talk more about grinding, but I think it is massive. I think it creates a lot of the challenges and the problems and has a big impact on flavor. But also people are often quite from a barista championship technical point of view, they wouldn't like this. But like today I was cupping coffee and the guy was like, have you started a timer? I'm like, I don't think it matters that much, mate. It's coarse ground coffee in a bowl. Like it doesn't. So sometimes I think we're guilty of like creating these like highly specific approaches to coffee that actually don't matter that much. And I think I'm interested in innovations that look at really moving the needle and changing something fundamental. Right. So like a grinder that it doesn't really matter how much time it takes to come out. It just tastes sweet all the time. Right. So I think, I think a lot of the noise in coffee probably doesn't matter really. It's interesting and I'm not against it, but I think there's a lot of overemphasized innovation, which is just really noise.
Hey, Ben, did you have a hot take?
My hot take is that book learning, or even worse, real learning, social media reels learning, does not qualify you to be a spokesperson for a particular subject and tell people who have real world application of this how to do their jobs.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think there's too much of a tendency of people.
Well, you're in favor with the new Chinese policy. Have you seen this policy?
No, inform me. What is the new Chinese policy?
The policy is that you can't talk on certain subjects that require expertise on social media in China without having a qualification on it.
Ah,
nice.
nice.
That's a full nother episode that we could dive into. Because on one side, I'm like, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. And the irony of me saying this on a podcast as we're talking about it. But I just think there's too much tendency for us to go out and read about a subject and kind of watch a few videos and then turn that around and state things as fact and us experts
having done it, tasted it, experienced it.
And the worst thing is like the barista and the roaster starting to talk about coffee processing and fermenting and educating people on that. It's just like take a moment to check yourself.
I would. When you want some advice from me on learning, is read all of the work by Christopher Ferran, because I think he's really good at trying to cut through the subject to what is like. He doesn't talk about stuff he hasn't spent years learning about. He's very open-minded, but the processing one's a great example there, that there's no such thing as, when we call coffee washed, it's not washed, and things like this, which are just, I think he's very good at looking at the subject of coffee and teaching it in a way that is considered comprehensive, but also understandable. Like, I think he's really, really good.
And there is something to be said about like people who are good educators and being able to synthesize and kind of isolate.
I think your point is more so when people are out there just stating something as fact, as I know better and as that. It's not a general thing of like, from my learnings over time, I've heard this, but dive deeper in all these other ways. It's not like a general shit of that.
Yeah, I think that's like a YouTube and social media problem, right? And I think coffee is always going to suffer from this because any complex field, people are looking for some rules, right? Or some simple things to follow or simple steps. And social media and, engagement rewards very strong opinions and very strong takes.
I was just going to say the same thing. That's where everything we're making is balanced stuff. It's like if I go out there and go, oh, well, but maybe it's this, or maybe it could be like a little bit of a middle ground. I've got to come out like the same statement where we say, we went viral a year and a half ago for saying home baristas are going to make better coffee than cafes in 2025. That's a year. I can argue both sides of that argument, but my point is being that like machines and technology at home have gotten to a certain amount. There's a certain innovation at home. Yeah. You also have the time to do it how you want at home. If you like your coffee boiling hot, you can do it. If you like it cooler, whereas they might not be able to do that at a cafe. But then you can argue the other side of, well, you're getting a different experience of different coffees shared amongst different people. I can argue both sides as well, but social media doesn't like it if I argue both sides.
We've got to be short and sharp and clear with our communication.
How often do you do blind taste testings looking at people's preferences where you're not teaching or judging?
Probably not enough, to be honest. Yeah, I do a lot of blind cuppings, obviously. It would all be blind. And
But
sometimes
with who? Who are the tasters?
varying from small focus groups of a team doing a panel assessment, a sensory panel assessment, to more of a public kind of engagement piece. But yeah, not so much on a consumer focus.
What do you put in front of the public? What kind of coffee do you put in front of the public?
It really varies. It depends on kind of what the project is. Yep.
Yeah. I ask because this is when I did the whole water thing, right? At the beginning, 2014, we had a bunch of coffee people in a room, and there, was lots of cohesive opinions and preferences. And that was really the study where we felt we could conclusively say bicarbonate is the one thing everyone can taste, which is the perceived acid is lower when there is more bicarb. And actually, Water for Coffee 2 is a lot more saying, look, there's a lot here that you can't claim or conclude. But the reason I say it is I just find myself, is the quality point you made about Robusta and Arabica. Because with the water point, I would do public tastings at like food events. There's no coffee people there. So many people preferred the high bicarb, which would do really bad in all specialty quality assessment. And the same with Robusta. Like we sit here and say, oh, because we're all in rewarding aromatic acidic Arabica, we sort of justify Robusta as a different category. But I just think there's a lot of people who think it tastes better.
And I think again, we come back into that categorization of like, who are you marketing to and what's the right product fit? And they're not right and wrong, but you're going to get, you're getting confirmation bias of a particular thing, or maybe not confirmation bias, but you're getting that audience is confirming they like that thing. Don't extrapolate that out to a different audience or a different product as being all one and the same. Okay, I'm going to ask you here, Maxwell. So the segment that we like to do at the end of each of our podcast episodes is asking you, is there someone that you would like to shout out to, that you would like to shine the light on a little bit, who you think is a bit under-celebrated?
Yeah, I think I mentioned him already in this podcast, which is Aaron Davies from Kew Gardens. I think the work he does is fascinating. And I know a lot of really coffee professional geeks know about his work, but I think a lot of people don't. And it's, until he started looking at documenting the species of coffee in the world, no one had done it. And that was only about sort of 10, 12 years ago. And I think his approach to it, like a lot of these people, like Chris, Chris is amazing. He's my friend and a brilliant academic who has become passionate about studying coffee. But these and just to be clear, I can be a very critical individual, but honestly, there are so many wonderful people in coffee that I have learned from and love to collaborate with, and are fascinating and great to be around. So I love we haven't talked about that much here, but not only do you put yourself around other people to learn, but it's just great to be around all these interesting, fascinating people who are all coming at coffee from different angles, And I love my point of view to be challenged. Like when I share a strong point of view, I know it's my point of view, right? It's not the only way to think about it. But like Chris and Aaron, these people have come from another field, and they're fascinated by all of these things we're talking about. They see us talk and are like, that's really interesting. And then they see how they could apply their knowledge, expertise, and learning to coffee. And the only way for them to do that, which brings this podcast full circle, is they very quickly realize, well, I cannot apply my expertise to this unless I learn about it first, unless I taste loads of coffee. And it's the same with James, the biotech inventor. He was like, okay, if I'm going to really invent great innovations for coffee, I need to taste lots of coffee and learn about coffee. So yeah, those are a few of the people who I'm always fascinated to hear their opinion and see what their insights into coffee are. So to clarify, that's Aaron Davies from Kew Gardens, Christopher H. Hendon, who's a professor of chemistry at the University of Oregon in Eugene, and also James Howell, who will hate that I've shouted him out, but he's the biotech inventor. He wants to be behind the curtain of coffee, right? He doesn't want to be on the stage. He just wants to do his work. But I think you're going to see more of his work come through the industry and innovations in the coming years.
We asked for one shout out and you gave us 3, so you ruined that segment as well. No, thank you so much. What an insightful chat. That brings us to the end of the podcast for today. That was amazing. I felt like I could have just sat there and listened, and my mind was moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So that was really exciting. We'll definitely at a later date have to get you on again, because there's obviously a lot more to talk about. As we wrap up, can you give us, you've got the new book dropping?
Yeah, Water for Coffee. Well, we're actually not calling it 2. It's is the same book, but hopefully better. That is printing right now. So it should go live at the end of November.
End of November. Wow, sounds like a perfect Christmas gift for the coffee lover in your life.
Sid.
As we come to the end of that.
It's the perfect gift, but it's also risky in that it might not be delivered before Christmas.
But that's all right. As long as it's coming and it's ordered. No, who cares? As long as it's ordered. You just have to be like, I've got you this gift. It's coming. As long as the transaction has been made, that's all that needs to happen in the gift giving process. So we're helping you sell more books there. But also, where else can people find you?
Yeah, so I've got, maxwelldashwood.com and my other books, and Water for Coffee will be on there, the business book as well. And then, a lot of my day job is I explore the coffee industry through Colonna Coffee, which is a roastery in the UK. We've got 2 shops as well, our original shop in Bath, Colonna and Smalls, and now we have a shop in London near Farringdon Station as well. So you can interact with the work I do at those places. And maybe you might see me at a coffee trade show around the world. And please say hello. Like, I love meeting new people and talking about anything, and no questions too stupid. So I hope to meet some of you around the world in the world of coffee.
And if you're one of those business owners that just started a cafe with 3 other owners and you just heard Maxwell say that it's going to collapse in 4 years, go and chat to him, because he said he's happy to talk to you and figure out how you can solve this problem. For everyone else listening, thank you so much for joining us. It's good to be back in Melbourne after being in host. Please make sure to reach out to us. We've got our socials, It's Just Coffee Pod. We've got our email, hello@itsjustcoffeepod.com.
Just CC in and you'll get us.
I'm losing the mind on all this. And we were just talking about it before. It just, when we were chatting about people exploring the industry and jobs and all that kind of stuff, we do a bunch of different coffee media here, whether it's coffee journalism, whether it's being on screen, whether it's sharing your knowledge at events. So if you're anyone who's working the industry in that field who's interested, make sure to drop us a line. It's not like there's anything going here, but we're always looking for great partners and people to work with. Obviously, Melbourne is a great standing point if you're listening from Melbourne, but also globally, It's Just Coffee are looking for different kind of representatives and people that we can lean on around the world. We're growing this community, so it'd be great to hear from us. And subscribe to the pod. We're making it as good as we can. We're bringing on the best guests in the world, like we did just now with Maxwell. What a get. Thank you for joining us. And Ben, you actually said when you were on your flight back from Italy that one of the flight attendants came up to you and they were like, I saw you in Italy. And what did they say?
They said, I still think instant coffee tastes better. I don't know what you guys are doing. They did not say that.
All right, we'll see. What did they say?
No, he's just making this stuff up. He just throws these things out at the end.
See you next time. Bye.